part of what's going on in atheist activism is 100% ego. It's 100% people chasing fame. It's good-looking young women who want to be the next Jaclyn Glenn, period. There are young men who want to be the next, what's the guy's name? Rationality Rules. There are these guys like this. They want to be famous and they want to be admired. And some of them, there's the further ego trip of wanting to make ostentatious use of their book learning, of presenting themselves as an expert in philosophy and logic and science. That's a really toxic, really noxious ego trip. But I do get it. There are people who are way more emotionally damaged than you are. You're really not emotionally messed up by this at all. There are people who are emotionally damaged by the transition they made from believing in God to atheism, and for whom they have that touchstone. They remember the crucial importance of some YouTube video or of some personality on YouTube talking about their own experience, talking about their own loss of faith, these kinds of things. And then that has become the dominant assumption of what activism is supposed to be, of what it's supposed to mean. You know what nobody ever says? Nobody ever says that tolerance and progress are fundamentally incompatible. You know, tolerance sounds like such an easy virtue to preach. What's actually going to change about circumcision? When is that going to end? Right? Like even the baby steps towards ending it, even if you don't make it illegal overnight, it's going to be intolerant. It's going to be confronting tradition and saying, no, we're not going to tolerate this, or we don't want to tolerate this tradition.
That's right.
We want progress. We want change. I'm really asking, how does this story end? This story that's been going on for 2,000 years, how is it going to end? I do not think it's going to end with YouTube channels and Facebook posts saying in a kind of smarmy, self-righteous way, oh, well, isn't it quaint that the legislatures in Canada still say prayers and in some cases still have Christian crosses on the walls. It's going to be activism of a very, very active kind. It's not going to be what the Richard Dawkins Foundation is doing with its money and prestige and fame, which is nothing. What they're doing is nothing. I'm an unusual person. I've lived in different countries all over the world. And everywhere I lived, I read the Constitution. I got my girlfriend on the phone right now. So,
Hi.
Melissa, you used to live with me in British Columbia, Canada, right?
That's right.
I take it you have never read the Constitution of Canada.
I admit I have not.
Well, it must have occurred to you that life in Canada, it's very, very similar to life in the United States, right? And
Absolutely.
Canadians watch American TV, and Canadians go around kind of thinking, oh, well, on American television, you have the right to remain silent. So here in Canada, you probably have the right to remain silent too. And in America, you have the separation of church and state. So here in Canada, we must have the separation of church and state too, right? Mm. And I assume, let's ask an open-ended way. Do you feel like religion played more or less of a role in public life in Canada versus the United States? Where do you think religion was more of a dominant influence, Canada versus the United States?
Well, from my personal experience, I would say that my life was more influenced by religion in the United States versus when I lived in British Columbia. But I note that when you voted, you were voting in a church, which
that's right
in the United States.
That's right. I cast my ballot. The vote literally took place inside a church. The place where I went to vote was a church. Go on, just making that clear for the audience. Yep.
Yeah, and I think one public parade had to do with the church. But anyway, the main point is that you were voting in a church.
Yeah, so that was a little reminder. So in the United States, where have you voted? Like when you voted, like City Hall or something, right? Some kind of government building.
School,
right?
Usually an elementary school or like a public. One was at a senior community center.
Okay. Yeah. So in the United States, you have this principle of separation of church and state. Would it surprise you if I told you that the first sentence of the Canadian Constitution is, quote, Canada is founded upon principles that recognize the supremacy of God, close quote.
Wow.
Now, what year do you think that was written in? I mean, in the United States, you guys are really used to worshiping your Constitution as this kind of ancient, moth-eaten relic of a... I think most Americans, you imagine that the Constitution was written almost in a different world by men of a very different intellectual character from anyone who's alive today. Yeah. When do you think...
Yeah.
When do you think Canada set down in stone this principle that we're a Christian nation based on the supremacy of God?
I actually don't know. It's funny. I was living in British Columbia, but
I know. That's why I'm doing this.
True.
I'm not doing this to humiliate my girlfriend. It's to get at the fact that these principles, they surround us and they pervade our daily lives. But most of us are completely unaware of them all the time. We don't, if you don't make it a point, most people who go to Cambodia don't read the Constitution of Cambodia. I did. Most people who live in Thailand or even go on vacation don't take an interest in the, legal underpinnings of what we experience politically here and now. But I got news for you. Constitution of Canada was written in 1982.
Okay. So
long before you were born. Long before you were born.
No. Yeah.
1982. I think that was when dudes having neon pink shoelaces was briefly in style. Guys wearing Converse with pink shoelaces.
Oh yeah.
The Gazelle sunglasses. This is not ancient history, right?
Back when roller rinks were popular, roller skating.
I think that died in the 70s. But hey, we could check. 1982, were there still roller rinks when the Canadian Constitution was written? So this is a modern, contemporary problem that's still really ongoing. Now, the side of this you don't know, Melissa, but you'll be able to relate to by allegory. What I want to draw attention to is the weakness of the discourse about activism within atheist activism. So, of course I can sympathize. Of course I can. But it's really depressing and really hopeless to behold. The Richard Dawkins Foundation, they just put up an article on their website about the fact that in Canada, basically we still have prayer inside our Houses of Parliament. Houses of Parliament, plural. We basically have one parliament for each province, plus one in Ottawa, not worth describing. Prayer, and even crosses hanging on the wall, Christian cross on the wall, it's common in the parliaments of Canada, including specifically the parliament for British Columbia. Right?
Wow.
Here's my problem. What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? What would be the form of activism to challenge this? Because it's a fundamentally different challenge from what you guys are used to in the United States. In the United States, every so often you have these controversies of, somebody has displayed the Ten Commandments in front of a courthouse. Someone at City Hall or state legislature has a monument to Moses and the Ten Commandments. And then atheist activists or secular activists, or even the American Satanist Party, they get out and say, no, in the Constitution, we're supposed to have separation of church and state.
Right.
Well, what kind of activism are you going to have when the Constitution is not on your side? When the Constitution says, quote, Canada is founded upon principles that recognize the supremacy of God. That is...
Advocate for a change in the Constitution.
Right. So activism requires action, to an unbelievable extent. The standards are what would be required, what would be involved here. It's really, really high. So the problem is, in my opinion, the indirect influence of Richard Dawkins himself. Richard Dawkins had a hit book in 2006 that was called The God Delusion. You You would have been around to remember that. I don't know. Were you in university or what? When did you? I mean, do you remember some ripples? Do you remember that being discussed on the radio or Oprah or whatever, or no?
No, I was in high school.
Okay, you were playing Diddy Kong Racing or something. You were playing.
I was too busy with choir practice and orchestra practice.
Ooh, so that was the phase. That was the phase when you were still in choir. You were still singing religious songs. But I assume you were not a believer. You were not praying or anything at that age. Yeah, high school.
I would say I still was going to church.
Wow.
But I was kind of seeing through it at that point.
Wow. Okay, so you were still on the fence. Isn't that interesting? Well, when the God Delusion came out, it was a big deal in the mainstream media. It got talked about on crappy TV news shows and radio shows a lot. It was a hit book. And I think most people, the main thing that impacted them was just the title. Just that here was a kind of respectable scientist publishing a book that really directly challenged, Christian religion. Of course, it also challenges Judaism and Islam to some extent. And saying, no, this is all wrong. This is a delusion. And that became a major talking point. My problem is here, talking is not activism. I think what this ended up enshrining was exactly the assumption that people making YouTube videos, and just fetching on YouTube, that is activism. Even that's like the ultimate form of activism. Now here, you can imagine this from a parallel life for you. Well, I'll come back to this. I don't know. I don't know if you have a moment where emotionally you feel that's when your faith started to crack. That's when you parted ways with the church. The YouTube obsession and the idea of talking as activism, talking replacing activism, it's partly ego, it's partly people wanting to get famous, sure. But I think there's also a really sincere emotional connection people have to that memory of how they once saw a YouTube video, maybe back when they were in high school playing Diddy Kong Racing on the N64 or whatever. Back when they were that age, they saw maybe Richard Dawkins himself, maybe another one of these YouTube personalities talking about the Bible and faith and atheism. And that was for them personally an emotionally significant touchstone or turning point. And they maybe on some level they want to do that for others, or they imagine that's the way forward for atheist activism, quite unexamined. For you, is there a moment like that? Is there an emotionally significant touchstone or no?
I was able to become more comfortable questioning it after I left my parents' house once I went to university.
Yeah.
I took a philosophy class, philosophy of religion. After that point, I decided that I didn't believe. But I don't have a, one moment in my mind that stands out.
Just coming back to the class, was the professor kind of trying to make people more Christian or no? And what was the professor's kind of basic approach? Because I've known professors who were like legitimately dogmatic Christians, dogmatic Jews also, who really were trying to use their class as a way to make the students more religious. Go on.
No, I did not get that sense from the professor. I more remember the smaller classes. So we had a large lecture hall type of setting, and then a discussion class that was once a week. And I remember more the person who led that discussion class, just because it was a smaller classroom.
Well, no offense.
I'm just saying, I felt that neither of them were trying to make you a believer in Christianity.
So I totally appreciate that. I was just asking because sometimes that's the effect, as you go to a class where people are making the argument for the Bible, and that turns you away. No, I just note, without insulting you or insulting your professor, you and I have done a lot of talk about the Bible, what's actually in the text of the Bible just lately. And it does not seem that you walked away from that class with a lot of knowledge of Scripture. You didn't. So it wasn't a course that was really based on reading and confronting what's in the Bible as opposed to your expectations. I think, if anything, you've had that experience just now. Just in the last couple of weeks, you've been reading the Bible and thinking, whoa, there's a huge gap between what people say about the Bible and what's actually in the text.
It did not inspire me to read the Bible. Not until recently, because, like I said, I was finally living out of the house and not having to answer to my parents. And it's only been recently, like, that I've been spending time with them again, that they've been asking me, like, about it. And the reason why I've gotten more interested in it is just because I want to be able to say why, like, and defend it more, or, like, talk about it more directly about. So, yeah, I mean, to get back to your point about talking is not activism, I think, like, the general, the feel that I get in the United States in terms of talking about religion, I think it's become more open to be atheist or to be questioning, but generally, like, I think people still believe in God, like,
right.
as a rule, like, they are theists, but a lot of, like, it's becoming more and more popular to be agnostic.
Yep.
And
well, you see it, just to give an example, the percentage of people in the American military who are Christian is lower than the percentage in the general population. And of course, the fundamental reason for that is that people in the military are younger than the general population.
Yeah.
But the type of guys who sign up to join the army, they're probably more conservative, etc. They're an interesting cross-section. But even a very simple system, it represents an overall generational drift. Yes.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, I think, my parents have become more open to that idea. But, like, the thing that I've been talking about with you is that,
right.
I tend to have extremist views on things. Like, so once I start learning more about something, I think, wow, I can't believe that this is still commonplace in society. So, like, we're still having a society filled with people that are saying that the Bible should be relevant at this point in history.
Yes.
Well, we're living in a country where,
and this is her shock, just to be clearly honest, this is your shock having just gone back and started reading the Bible, like, really, because, the Bible just wasn't much of a part of your life for 10 years or something, so no, I just that's a bit more sympathetic for the audience. It's reading the Bible and realizing, wow, this is such a mess, and this is, it's just intellectually not respectable. Anyway, go on.
Oh, yeah, and the way that modern day Christianity is in America and how it basically would lead somebody to not read the Bible. That's, from my experience. Like, you're raised with these certain stories from the Bible that you hear growing up as a child, but it's not like they inspire you to go and read the Bible in church either. Like, they tell you a message, they tell you a sermon.
The culture of pious ignorance includes being piously ignorant about what the Bible actually says or problems in the text, right? Yeah,
that's exactly right. Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. Jesus loves you.
Well,
Jesus saves.
Look, the other contrast you've got.
Modern day Christianity is in America.
So, Melissa, you don't just have the contrast between having been raised Christian and being atheist now. The other contrast you've got is between the obsession with activism that goes on within the vegan movement, and then this assumption about YouTube and radio talk shows and other, talking as activism, which again, for me, it really is centered around, symbolically, someone like Richard Dawkins, in atheist activism. So I'd say, I think that's another contrast. Now, both can be criticized, both are blameworthy in various ways. Like, you might say there's almost a fetish in vegan activism for the street rebel. It accomplishes nothing, but rebellion on the street is valorized by someone. That's the realest, most meaningful form of activism. And there's a whole discourse surrounding that. But then, so this is a total contrast. I'm really asking, how does this story end? This story that's been going on for 2,000 years, how is it going to end? I do not think it's going to end with YouTube channels and Facebook posts saying in a kind of smarmy, self-righteous way, oh, well, isn't it quaint that the legislatures in Canada still say prayers and in some cases still have Christian crosses on the walls? So, both are deeply flawed. But how do you actually change the legal, the fundamental basis of education in your society, of attitudes in your society, of the conduct of government in your society? It's this huge challenge, even in a place that's as ostensibly mild as Canada. I mean, Canada is not Egypt. Egypt's a fascinating case study. Egypt is very far from being the most fundamentalist Muslim country in the world. If anything, Egypt is quite moderate compared to Saudi Arabia. But a huge challenge to secularize Egyptian society. But even looking at British Columbia, okay, you say you're an atheist activist. You know, what is the goal you're pursuing? And then how are you going to actually pursue it? Don't we have to fundamentally move past this emotive and emotional sharing of our problems on YouTube? And sorry, I'm emphasizing that because that's the most sympathetic element to me. Part of what's going on in atheist activism is 100% ego. It's 100% people chasing fame. It's good-looking young women who want to be the next Jaclyn, period. And some of those women are not that young either. They're sometimes good-looking middle-aged women. There are young men who want to be the next, what's the guy's name? Rationality rules. There are these guys like this. They want to be famous and they want to be admired. And some of them, there's the further ego trip of wanting to make ostentatious use of their book learning, of presenting themselves as an expert in philosophy and logic and science and reason. That's a really toxic, really noxious ego trip. But I do get it. There are people who are way more emotionally damaged than you are. You're really not emotionally messed up by this at all. There are people who are emotionally damaged by the transition they made from believing in God to atheism, and for whom they have that touchstone. They remember the crucial importance of some YouTube video or of some personality on YouTube talking about their own experience, talking about their own loss of faith, these kinds of things. And then that has become the dominant assumption of what activism is supposed to be, of what it's supposed to mean.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say what to do. You know, the question is, how is it going to end? This 2,000 years of Christianity and major religion, or just, you know, how are we going to actually live in a secular society?
I'm circumcised. I am circumcised. Both of my parents were atheists at the time of my birth.
I think it takes accepting that religion can be very damaging.
Right.
And it is. I mean, people just want to preach tolerance and say, you know, tolerance of all different religions. And
right.
It's obviously not true. I mean, the harm is done with men every day. I mean, like with babies every day. General mutilation on a massive scale.
You know what nobody ever says? Nobody ever says that tolerance and progress are fundamentally incompatible. You know? I mean, tolerance sounds like such an easy virtue to preach. What's actually going to change about circumcision? When is that going to end? Right? Like, even the baby steps towards ending it, even if you don't make it illegal overnight, it's going to be intolerant. It's going to be confronting tradition and saying, no, we're not going to tolerate this, or we don't want to tolerate this tradition.
That's right.
We want progress. We want change. Go ahead. You know.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But it's going to be activism of a very, very active kind. It's not going to be what the Richard Dawkins Foundation is doing with its money and prestige and fame, which is nothing. What they're doing is nothing. Before making this video, I went and reread their charter, and you know, I looked at what it is they define themselves as doing. You know, I mean, so the term they like to use is advancing secularism. It's a little bit vague. It's a little bit vague, right? I mean,
how are you going to do that? I mean, what's the end goal?
A lot of this too, it's really easy to pick on the kind of low-hanging fruit. It's really easy to look at something like the anti-vaxxing controversy, right? And say, oh, well, we represent enlightenment and science and modernity, whereas these people who are against vaccinations want to drag us back into the Stone Age. That's a little bit too easy for me. That's a little bit ideologically convenient, right? You know what's inconvenient? What's inconvenient is saying to the people of British Columbia, Canada, oh, you have this tradition of prayer at the start of every session of the legislature. oh, well, guess what? We want to take that away from you. There are people who will fight back. There are people who say, no, we have this tradition going back however many centuries of doing prayer here at the, this is their tradition, this is their religion. There are chapels, there are religious, buildings within our parliament buildings in Canada. I know there are in Ottawa, at least. I think in both Ottawa and Quebec and Ontario. The idea of having a chaplain or something employed by the government to say these prayers at the start of legislative sessions and so on. This is a British Empire tradition, and say, oh, well, guess what? We want to take away your tradition. We want to end that. For our own reasons, and we're a minority. We're not the majority in this society that wants a secular society. Babe, sorry, go on.
I don't want to change the topic too much, but having lived in China and Taiwan,
right?
In Taiwan, you walk around and you see Taoist temples. And you see a society that is secular, and people aren't that messed up about Taoism, about Buddhism. I mean, positive thing.
That's why I wanted to make videos about Taoism. I want you to keep going. But one of the reasons I wanted to make videos talking about Taoism is that most Westerners cannot imagine how fundamentally different it is to be in a society where Taoism is the dominant religious tradition, rather than
where religion isn't inherently oppressive and inherently conservative.
Well, I would say where the meaning of religion itself is fundamentally different because it's a Taoist set of assumptions. Go on, yeah, it's a huge difference.
Yeah, and having lived in China, we're, living really in a secular society.
Right.
It's not a disaster. I mean, there are ways to study different places in the world that are actually mostly secular, and seeing it is not a terrible thing.
Even aggressively secular. I mean, sorry, let's just pause. Right now, China is in the act of forcing Muslims to either adopt moderate Islam or get out. They can either become atheists or they can become moderate by the definition the government set down for them. And there's no tolerance there. It's the end of tolerance for fundamentalist Islam, for authentic Islam, I would say. That's no longer being tolerated in communist China. That's a huge fundamental turning point in their history. Obviously, I could now digress into a long lecture about the history, but I'm not going to. But I just say the example of China is not a passively atheist or passively secular society. It's a very active, muscular, and even oppressive model of atheism that we're going to have to write as a chapter in the history books. We're going to have to learn from that example, the good and the bad of it. Yeah, sorry, go on.
That's right. But when you were talking about people that will fight back against atheist activists saying you don't have the right to pray before, legislature, before, proceedings happen in court, in parliament. In a sense, I just see it as kind of phony tradition. Yeah. Compared to this tradition of Taoism, compared to other religions in the world, is because, if you're actually thinking about the place, British Columbia, the tradition of the people, like the native people that were there, is completely different. You're bringing your culture from wherever in Europe. I mean, that's where you're bringing it from. It's like, I don't know.
You're a long way from Jerusalem. You're a long way from Damascus in British Columbia.
Right. I'm trying to place names like with a new place, can't there be new tradition? Can't we just say, new tradition has no place because it's a whole new thing?
Look, babe.
No place in the world because, like in North America, it's the site of the worst genocide. Worst.
Well, the competition for worst genocide is pretty intense. Look, I was going to just tell you an anecdote. This is an anecdote you've never heard from me before. Back when I was in Toronto, I just finished at University of Toronto. Was in the brief period when I collected my university diploma, but I was still kind of on campus. And I went in to talk to an advisor. And it turned out the advisor was the president of that division of the university. Not worth describing. A lot of big universities in Canada have multiple divisions. So he wasn't the president of the whole thing, but he was a very, very powerful person in the university. And I recognized him because he was the guy who said the prayer at the ceremony where they gave me my diploma. So I wasn't expecting that. I just knew I made a booking to see an advisor, and I didn't really know who it was, and it turned out it was this guy. And the first thing I said to him, and you can be offensive without using a single swear word, but I said this in the most jarring and offensive way possible. I said, when you delivered that prayer, at the graduation ceremony, I didn't know if I should leave the room or if I should scream out to interrupt you, if I should shout out. I was so offended. I was so hurt. I was disgusted by that whole ceremony and what you did. And again, you know me. I'm capable of being very intimidating and very offensive when I want to be. So there was no coarse language involved. And he was a fully grown man. I would guess he was in his late 40s. He was shaken up by my saying this to him, and obviously it was also totally unexpected in the context. For me too, it was unexpected. But I kind of recognized, whoa, this is a brief window of opportunity where I can really confront this guy about secularism or religion versus atheism in this context. And I really let him know how disgusted I was. And what he said back to me was 100% sincere. He said that he had worked really hard on the prayer, and he thought he'd made a prayer that included all of the world religions. And I said, yeah? What about Hinduism? What about Buddhism? What about the native people whose land this university was built on? Whether they're Ojibwe or Mohawk or, what have you.
Right.
In terms
are you including animism?
In terms of who survives today. And we all know, again, religions are not all equal. If he had done a Taoist prayer, it wouldn't have been as offensive. If he had actually had someone in from, say, the Cree or Ojibwe community, or even whatever, the last remnants of some kind of Iroquois community to do a prayer, it's a little bit different. I would rather have none of those religions represented, but it's not the same as the conquering Christian faith celebrating itself this way. And he sat there, his reaction, he sat there and actually, oh, I guess you're right. I guess it's just Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. It was basically a prayer to Jesus, but they didn't specify Jesus to me. That's all it. He really thought he was woke in delivering that prayer. But look, this is my conclusion with that. That meeting with someone in an elite position of power, I did not feel like I'd accomplished anything. I didn't feel like this was effective activism. For me, it was a reminder of how powerless we are in the face of that kind of tradition. I would bet money that the next year they did the same ceremony. I don't think anything changed. I don't think that challenge. I think it probably for him, probably that guy is watching this video, I think he remembered that meeting for the rest of his life because he was not used to students being that aggressive toward him. So hey guys, keep it legal. But I really managed to ruffle the feathers of an authority figure in that meeting.
That's right.
But I came away from that with an even deeper appreciation of how powerless I am and we are, even in Canada. Canada is not Egypt, but in Canada, religion is written into the Constitution. Okay, babe, the video is past 30 minutes, so I'm just going to wrap it up there. We can keep talking offline. You guys know what it is. Hit the subscribe button. À-bas-le-ciel.